I always believed loyalty mattered. I showed up every day at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before anyone else on my floor. My desk was spotless. My reports? Impeccable. I helped my manager, Ellen, hit every deadline, even the unreasonable ones. I covered for team members, organized team lunches, and somehow, even remembered every last birthday in the marketing department. So when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't expect flowers and champagne. But I didn't expect war, either. Hi, I'm Natalie Reid. And before we go any further, can I ask one small favor? If stories of resilience, betrayal, and triumph interest you, please subscribe to Karma Encrypted. Supporting stories like mine helps ensure voices like ours are never silenced again. Back to the story. My husband and I had been trying for 2 years. 2 years of doctors, tests, and heartbreak. When the test finally turned positive, I cried right there in the CVS parking lot. That little plus sign felt like a miracle. But a miracle isn't what my company saw. At my 12-week appointment, I got the all clear to share the news. So I did. First to Ellen, my manager, and then in a casual Slack post to the team. The reactions were lukewarm. Not cruel. Not warm. Just stiff. Ellen's smile had cracked a little too fast. Wow. That's great news, Natalie. Congrats. That week, the energy changed. I wasn't paranoid. I was observant. Projects I'd normally lead were reassigned to a junior associate. My ideas in meetings were suddenly ignored. I found myself conveniently left off email threads. I once got copied into an internal memo titled, Maternity Coverage Plan. My heart dropped. I wasn't even showing yet. The final blow came on a Monday morning when I found a formal envelope placed on my keyboard. Inside it read, due to restructuring and company prioritization efforts, your role has been eliminated effective immediately. Thank you for your service. No severance. No empathy. No warning. I sat in the women's bathroom stall, clutching the letter, numb. My baby bump was barely visible beneath my tailored blouse. This was discrimination. I knew it. And yet I was terrified. Who would hire a pregnant woman? I didn't call my husband right away. I walked to my car and drove around the city for 3 hours, numb, looping the same 5 blocks, asking myself one impossible question. What did I do to deserve this? The answer came from a woman I'd never met. An employment rights attorney named Kendra Baylor. A former client of mine referred me, and I made an appointment out of sheer desperation. Her office smelled like lavender and legalese. She looked at me and said, "This is illegal. You know that, right?" I didn't. Kendra explained how companies use vague phrases like restructuring to mask pregnancy discrimination. They rely on fear. They bet on silence. But I wasn't going to be silent. With her help, we filed a formal complaint. The company panicked. I received a threatening letter from their in-house counsel warning me about NDAs I had signed. I remember Kendra smiling and saying, "Good. That means they're scared." But I didn't just want a settlement. I wanted to rebuild. Not for revenge. For dignity. I took a temp job at a local PR firm just to make ends meet. Every day, my belly grew. So did my fire. In that cramped cubicle, I started sketching business models. I had experience. I knew the market. I had ideas, real ones my previous company had shelved because they said I thought too much like a founder. So I became one. After Ava was born, 6 pounds, 4 ounces of fire, I launched Brightwave, a boutique marketing consultancy focused on female-led startups. My clients were moms, teachers, outcasts, and dreamers. And they were hungry. The growth was slow, but steady. By year 2, Brightwave signed its first 7-figure deal. By year 3, we were being pitched by venture firms who had once ghosted me. And then something wild happened. My former company went up for acquisition. They were flailing. Outdated strategies. Rotting leadership. A toxic culture finally catching up to them. And guess who acquired them? That's right. Me. Well, technically Brightwave, under a shell corp we formed for the deal. But make no mistake. I walked into that same office, now very much showing as the CEO of the parent company. When I passed Ellen in the hallway, her face went white. She looked me over like a ghost had come to haunt her. I nodded. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I was home. But I wasn't the same Natalie who got a pink slip tucked into her keyboard. I was the CEO now. And I wasn't there for revenge. I was there to rebuild the culture I'd once believed in. I thought reclaiming my dignity through Brightwave was the end of the story. I had no idea it was just the beginning. The real test wasn't building a business. It was leading it, managing growth, and confronting the ghosts of my past when I least expected it. After acquiring my former company under Brightwave Holdings, I faced a crossroads. Some advised me to dismantle it out of spite, to fire the execs who fired me, gut the departments, rebrand the office. But that wasn't leadership. That was ego. And I hadn't fought this hard just to become a mirror of what I hated. So I called a town hall meeting. The same auditorium where I once sat with fear in my gut now stood before me, packed with confused employees whispering rumors. I walked onto that stage. 6 months postpartum, a few sleepless nights behind me, and wearing the same shade of lipstick I wore on the day I was fired. "Good morning," I said, the microphone cool in my hand. "Let's clear the air." And I did. I told them the truth. That I'd been fired for being pregnant. That I'd fought back, not just for myself, but for every person who'd ever been made to feel small, expendable, disposable. There was stunned silence. And then, something I didn't expect. Applause. Not everyone clapped, but many did. Because most of them didn't know. And even those who did, they were done being silent too. I offered every employee a chance to leave with a generous severance if they didn't align with our new vision. Only 3 people left. The rest stayed. But rebuilding wasn't easy. Some departments had toxic cultures too deeply embedded to salvage. I had to restructure, rehire, retrain. I partnered with diverse leaders across industries. HR reformers, legal equity experts, maternal health advocates, to create internal policies that prioritized people. Not just pregnant women, but caregivers, single parents, survivors of discrimination. I was building the kind of company I needed back when I was vulnerable. Still, there were setbacks. A major investor pulled out during the restructuring phase, citing reputational uncertainty. My inbox filled with board-level passive aggression. Some clients walked. I cried in my office more than once, doubting everything. And then came the media backlash. A former executive anonymously leaked documents suggesting I had taken vengeful control and was using the company for personal redemption theater. It hurt. Not because it was true, but because I realized something terrifying. Even after winning, women still weren't allowed to show power without it being called revenge. I called a press conference. I stood in front of a wall of reporters, held up a framed letter, my original termination notice, and said, "This isn't vengeance. It's restoration. I didn't burn bridges. I bought them, rebuilt them, and now everyone gets to walk across." The clip went viral. This time, in a good way. Media outlets shifted their tone. My LinkedIn exploded with messages from young professionals, especially mothers, who said they finally felt seen. One message stood out. It was from a former intern named Mallory. "You probably don't remember me, but you defended me in a meeting once when I was too scared to speak. That changed the course of my life. Today I'm VP of product at a tech firm. Thank you for standing when no one else would." I sobbed in the office bathroom that afternoon. Not from pain, but because I finally saw the ripple. I wasn't just fixing a company. I was reshaping a culture. Brightwave wasn't just a brand anymore. It became a movement. We launched a mentoring program. I invested in startups run by mothers. I testified before Congress about pregnancy discrimination. And every time I walked into a room that once made me small, I took up space. Fully. And then something wild happened. Forbes reached out. They wanted to feature me in their Women in Power edition. I thought it was a prank. But a week later, I stood in a studio, camera lights warm on my skin, a stylist fixing my blazer collar while someone said, "Natalie Reid, CEO, mother, founder. You're changing the future of work." I smiled. But not because of the spotlight. Because in that moment, I knew. Every sleepless night, every insult, every setback had led to this. I didn't just survive being fired while pregnant. I rewrote the ending. And it was only the beginning. When I officially stepped into the CEO's office, I expected a sense of finality. A grand arrival. The cinematic closing of a loop. Instead, I felt overwhelmed. The office, my office, was the same one Mr. Callahan used to sit in while denying me promotions and silently checking his watch every time I spoke in meetings. The smell of mahogany and old cologne still lingered. The bookshelves still held his outdated leadership books. His name was even still etched on the door. I stood in the doorway for a long time that morning. The assistant outside, Madeline, a sharp young woman who reminded me of myself 5 years ago, looked at me with hesitation. "Do you want the nameplate changed?" she asked. I gave her a small smile. "Not yet. Leave it. I want them to know who I replaced." Within the first 2 weeks, I realized the company was in far worse shape than anyone had disclosed. The books were a mess, the product pipeline had stagnated, and morale? Morale was buried somewhere beneath layers of fear and gossip. The CFO, Richard Stein, had stayed on after the acquisition, begrudgingly. He had once signed off on my termination and now had to address me as Ms. Reid in meetings. There was tension in every interaction. Not just between us, but among all the holdovers who hadn't been let go. One afternoon, I called for an internal audit. Full financials, departmental performance, vendor contracts, the whole thing. Richard tried to push back. "This level of scrutiny will slow everything down." I looked him straight in the eye. "If there's something you don't want discovered, now's the time to resign." He didn't. And the audit began. The findings were damning. Money was being funneled into ghost consulting firms. Lavish executive perks, private jets, 5-figure dinners, bizarre innovation retreats to European resorts. The irony? When I'd asked for an ergonomic chair during my pregnancy, they claimed the budget was too tight. I stood at the head of the boardroom table, holding a thick report in my hands. "The previous leadership exploited this company's resources under the guise of innovation," I said. "There will be consequences." Silence. I turned the pages slowly, letting them see the highlighted payments and forged authorizations. "Richard," I said, not looking up. "Care to explain this $275,000 vendor contract for wellness consulting signed on a Sunday?" He sputtered. I don't recall. You signed it with your wife's signature, who, I might add, is not employed here." His chair creaked as he leaned back, red creeping into his cheeks. One of the board members looked away. I continued. "Effective immediately. You're suspended pending legal review. And yes, your corporate card has been deactivated." The next day, HR requested a meeting with me. Apparently, some of the executive team felt targeted and uncomfortable with the changes I was making. I almost laughed. Uncomfortable? I sat through the meeting, hands folded, listening to a senior director explain how abrupt restructuring affects productivity. This from the same man who once told me during a one-on-one review that motherhood tends to dilute ambition. When he was done talking, I responded calmly. I was terminated while pregnant. I lost my income, my health insurance, and nearly lost my child to stress. That was abrupt. What you're experiencing is accountability. He never raised objections again. Behind the scenes, my allies grew. One of them was an unexpected source. Helen Torres, the head of product. She'd been with the company for over a decade, often underestimated and overshadowed by louder male voices. She sent me a handwritten note after the audit. "They underestimated us both. You lead, I'll build. Let's fix this place." I kept that note in my top drawer. Under Helen's leadership, we revamped our legacy software, pivoted to new AI solutions, and secured a $40 million investment from an equity firm impressed with our transformation plan. The company's value surged. So did internal morale. One day as I walked through the office, I saw an employee, one I didn't recognize, wearing a sweatshirt that read, "Led by Natalie." I stopped him. "Where'd you get that?" He smiled. "Our new head of culture had them made for the relaunch next month. You're kind of a legend around here." I didn't know what to say. I nodded, stunned. But just when I thought we were finally gaining steady ground, an envelope arrived at my desk. It was from Callahan. Yes, that Callahan. He was threatening legal action. Apparently, he was claiming that my acquisition of the company was done under personal vendetta, and that he intended to sue for defamation and breach of fiduciary duty. His lawyer's tone was arrogant and dated. His argument? Laughable. Still, it triggered something inside me. I had worked so hard to rise from what they'd buried me under. And now the ghost of my past was trying to crawl back into my future. I went home that evening and sat in my daughter's nursery, the letter resting on my lap. She was asleep in her crib, her chest rising and falling softly. The silence felt sacred. I whispered, "They won't win. Not again. Not while you're watching." The next day, I called my legal team. Not just to respond, but to investigate Callahan's finances during his last year as CEO. Turns out, his skeletons weren't just in his closet. They were in offshore accounts too. The lawsuit didn't go far. In fact, it collapsed under the weight of evidence we submitted in a neat, damning package. Callahan retreated quietly, but not before the press got wind of it. The headline on Business Insider? CEO Natalie Reid cleans house and doubles value, while ex-execs face legal heat. I framed that article in my office. Right below it, I finally installed the nameplate on the door. Natalie Reid, CEO. I used to think getting fired while pregnant was the lowest point of my life. But nothing prepared me for what it felt like to sit across the boardroom table from the man who did it, with the authority to fire him. I didn't. Not yet. The merger with my former company was complete. Overnight, I went from building my own brand to inheriting a tarnished empire. There were toxic pockets of leadership still clinging to old ways. People who looked at me and still saw liability instead of leader. I walked into the executive floor on my first official day as CEO in a crisp white pantsuit, heels clicking on the tile like punctuation. Natalie Reid was no longer someone to overlook. And they knew it. Gregory Lane, my old boss, stood by the window when I entered the office that used to be his. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a handshake. Just stared at me with that same smug expression he wore the day HR escorted me out. "I didn't think you had it in you," he muttered. I smiled. "That's because you were too busy looking at my stomach to see what was in my head." He chuckled dryly. "You're here to fire me then?" "No," I replied. "I'm here to make you irrelevant." That stung more. I had no intention of stooping to his level. Letting him go would be too easy. Watching him have to answer to the very woman he called a risk to productivity, that was justice. My leadership would be built on competence, not revenge. But oh, how satisfying it felt to flip the power dynamic. Within the first month, I rolled out sweeping changes. Improved maternity benefits, flexible work hours for new parents, and a formal apology from the company regarding discriminatory practices. The Public Relations Department issued a statement. I signed it personally. Some praised me. Some whispered behind closed doors. But what mattered was the message. The culture had changed, and I was the reason why. One afternoon, while preparing for a keynote speech at a tech summit, I received an email marked urgent. It was from Tanya, a former intern. She was pregnant, terrified, and said her manager was already subtly pressuring her to take unpaid leave. Déjà vu burned in my chest. I summoned the manager. Not tomorrow. Not in an email. Nah. 10 minutes later, he stood in front of me, blinking fast as I slid Tanya's email across the table. "Did you really ask a pregnant employee if she'd consider stepping aside for the sake of project efficiency?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean." "You did. And you've got until 5 p.m. to submit a written apology, effective immediately. And by tomorrow, you'll be on sensitivity training. You will learn what respect looks like in this company. And if you can't, don't bother coming back." He left pale. I sat back, pulse steady. That was the moment I knew I had stepped fully into the role I was born for. Not just CEO but advocate. Shield. Sword. Later that evening, after putting Ava to bed, I sat in my home office going through a list of candidates for a VP position. One name caught my eye. Tanya. That's when it hit me. Full circle. She reminded me of myself. Bright, unsure, standing at the crossroads of fear and potential. And now, I could be the one to reach back and pull someone forward. I scheduled her for an interview personally. When she walked into my office a week later, visibly nervous, I smiled and stood. Natalie Reid, I said, offering my hand. You may know my story, but I'd like to hear yours. They say success changes you. What they don't tell you is how success changes the people around you. I had just gotten off a flight from New York, my inbox was overflowing, and the press was buzzing about my recent moves. Forbes had just listed Brightwave as a top 10 rising investment firm. But none of that compared to the storm brewing inside the building I now owned, the same company that once fired me while I was pregnant. I was back in that glass-paneled office. But this time, I wasn't in a visitor's chair. I was behind the CEO's desk. And I had a war to wage. 3 days earlier, I received a discreet email from Jasmine, my assistant. Subject: You need to see this. Attached was a spreadsheet showing internal messages exchanged among top department heads. People I hadn't yet had the chance to replace since acquiring the company. Messages mocking my leadership. Comments about my pregnancy. A few of them joking that they'd ride it out until she folds. I stared at my screen in disbelief. My stomach twisted, not with fear, but with purpose. They thought I was weak. That motherhood made me soft. That because I'd won a lawsuit, I didn't know how to lead. They were about to learn that Natalie Reid wasn't just back. I was the architect now. At 7:30 a.m. sharp, I called for a confidential meeting. Every person involved in the leaked messages sat across from me, their expressions ranging from guilty to smug. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the table. I simply slid the printed emails across the desk. This, I said, is what you think leadership looks like? One man shifted uncomfortably. Another, a woman I once mentored, looked down. Let me make something clear. I didn't fight for this seat so you could test me. I rebuilt a company while breastfeeding an infant. I negotiated mergers during postpartum insomnia. I brought in clients while still recovering from betrayal. If you think this title came with fear, you've underestimated me. Silence. And then, I did something they didn't expect. I stood and opened the blinds. Outside, nearly 200 employees were gathered for our quarterly company town hall. I turned back to the room. You're going to walk with me down there, and you're going to announce your resignation, because if you don't, I'll make every single one of these emails public. And trust me, that won't just end your careers. It'll rewrite your reputations. One by one they rose. And followed me down. The aftermath was brutal but necessary. News broke that Brightwave had conducted an internal ethics purge. I received both backlash and admiration. Some accused me of vengeance. Others praised me for enforcing a culture shift. But the most important part? The rest of the staff, young interns, new mothers, marginalized voices, they saw a CEO who wouldn't compromise her values. I didn't win through revenge. I won through integrity. That night, I tucked my son, Isaiah, into his crib. He looked up at me with those wide brown eyes. Innocent, unknowing of the battles I fought to protect a future he'd grow into. I whispered, I do this for you. And for the first time in months, I cried. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I was proud. 3 weeks later, I stood before a private roundtable of investors, preparing for our biggest move yet, the public offering of Brightwave. One of the senior bankers leaned in. Ms. Reid, he said, you've done what most said was impossible. Why now? I smiled. Because I've built something worth sharing. Not just a company but a culture. And the world is ready for leaders who don't apologize for being women, for being mothers, for being underestimated. He raised his glass. To Natalie Reid. But I lifted mine higher. To every woman who was ever told she was too much, too soft, or too complicated. We don't just belong here, we built this place. The bell rang on the trading floor the following Monday morning. Brightwave went public at triple valuation. And I stood center stage, holding Isaiah in one arm, while my free hand rang the bell. The morning sun spilled across the skyline, casting a golden light on the glass exterior of Weston Hale Enterprises. Natalie stood in front of the building that once tried to erase her. This time, she wasn't here as a terminated employee seeking justice. She was here as the newly appointed CEO, a woman who had fought like hell to get here, and won. It had been months since the board's shocking decision to reinstate her. The headlines were still fresh. Pregnant and fired. Now she runs the company that betrayed her. Natalie Reid. From wrongful termination to corporate triumph. But stepping into the executive office wasn't the fairy tale ending most assumed. The air was thick with expectation. Half the staff still saw her as a symbol of controversy, the other half as a hero. And lurking behind polished smiles were those who hoped she'd fail. Natalie didn't flinch. She walked into the boardroom, her white pantsuit pristine, her presence commanding. "Good morning," she said with a cool grace. "Let's talk strategy." Some members of the leadership team exchanged glances. One of them, Marcus, the former COO who'd once smirked when she was escorted out pregnant and panicked, cleared his throat. "Ms. Reid, there are concerns. Investors are wary. We need a conservative approach." She folded her hands. "What we need is to stop playing defense. Westonhale has been losing market share to hungrier competitors. You all have been so afraid of change. You've forgotten how to lead." Silence. Then, she laid down the plan she'd been crafting in secret since the day her lawsuit ended. A merger. A rebrand. A bold expansion into underserved markets using innovative maternity-centered tech that had never before been prioritized. "Let me be clear," she said. "We're not just fixing this company. We're transforming it." The stunned room slowly gave way to questions. Hard ones. But she answered each with clarity and control. By the end of the hour, even Marcus had leaned back in his seat, nodding. The next 6 months became a whirlwind. Under Natalie's leadership, the company launched Vive Tech, a product suite designed by women for women, smart health devices tailored for maternity and postpartum care. Not only did it resonate with the public, it went viral. Sales surged. So did media attention. But success brought new waves of attention. One night, as she sat in her office long after hours, her assistant Jenna entered. "There's a reporter from Forbes on the line. They're finalizing the 30 under 30 list. And you're not just on it. You're the cover." Natalie blinked. "What?" "They want to feature your story. From being fired while pregnant to now running a company valued at nearly $1 billion. They said it's unprecedented." For a moment, she was quiet. Then she smiled. Not because of the recognition, but because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rewriting the rules. Still, some wounds remained. On a quiet Saturday morning, she visited her old apartment where she'd first discovered the termination email. She stood in the same spot, 6 months pregnant, tears on her cheeks, unsure of the future. "And now," she whispered, "we made it." Later that day, her former boss, Harold Easton, reached out. He had been forced into retirement and was facing a slew of internal complaints from other women emboldened by Natalie's fight. His message was short. "Natalie, I was wrong. Congratulations on what you've built." She didn't respond. The final board meeting of the year arrived. Natalie stood before the room and projected a graph. Exponential growth, record profits, rising employee satisfaction. Then she turned to the team and said, "This is what happens when you bet on the underestimated. This is what happens when you stop treating women's needs as business risks." Applause filled the room. Afterward, a young intern approached her with wide eyes. "Ms. Reid, I just wanted to say thank you. Because of you, I don't feel afraid to pursue leadership. You changed everything." Natalie smiled and placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Don't thank me. Just promise to do the same for someone else one day." As the Forbes issue hit newsstands, the headlines said it all. Natalie Reid, the CEO who turned discrimination into domination. And beneath it, her quote, "They fired me for being pregnant. But now, I hire. I lead. I rewrite the rules." She had walked through fire. They tried to burn her down. Instead, she rose and lit the way for others.